It's time now for Truth or Fake. Truth or Fake, we welcome to the studio, as well as Selena, who's here for sport. We welcome to the far side of the studio, Charlotte, who's got all the details. Charlotte Hughes joining us over there. Today, Charlotte, you're looking at the French Open that wrapped up over the weekend with Russia's Mirra Andreeva winning the women's final. But since there's been a lot of speculation regarding why her country's flag wasn't allowed at the trophy ceremony. So, Charlotte, over to you.
Yes, Mark. So Saturday saw 19-year-old Andreeva overcome a tense start to become the youngest French Open women's singles champion since Monica Seles back in 1992. Now, as you mentioned, during the trophy ceremony, the Russian flag was not raised, nor was the country's national anthem played in the stadium. And this angered some internet users who have their own theories as to why that was. In this post on X that racked up 100,000 views, one person accused France of banning the anthem, I quote, because it is afraid of a 19-year-old girl, afraid of a flag. The post continues, I quote, France no longer deserves sport, it deserves shame. Similarly, another person here denounced the absence of the Russian flag and anthem at the ceremony. I quote, shame on France. Their post garnered more than 470,000 views. Now, someone else who took to social media in the wake of Andreeva's achievement was French politician François Asselineau. Without evidence, he accused the organisers of the ceremony of acting upon orders from French President Emmanuel Macron. However, all of these theories, Mark, are baseless. Neither France nor President Macron were responsible for the absence of the Russian flag and the anthem during that trophy ceremony.
Indeed, the internet and social media, it is just sometimes just a bucket of tripe, isn't it, to be perfectly frank? So if it wasn't France that took this decision, then Charlotte, then who did?
Well, the tournament organisers were conforming with the rules of a decision taken not by President Emmanuel Macron, but rather by the International Tennis Federation. So since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine back in 2022, the federation has banned Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing under their national colours. However, participation under a neutral banner, on the other hand, is allowed. Here I've got an extract from a statement made by the federation back in March of 2022, which explains the rules. It says, I quote, players from Russia and Belarus will continue to be allowed to compete in international tennis events as individuals. However, they will not compete under the name or flag of Russia or Belarus until further notice, rather. So that is the real reason behind the absence of the Russian flag and anthem at that trophy ceremony in question, and why no Russian flag appeared next to Andreeva's name on the screen as these scores were being kept throughout Saturday's match. Now, the same rules were also in force at the Paris Olympics back in 2024, as explained in another statement I found here on the Federation's website. Again, it states the Federation, as well as the International Olympic Committee, would allow athletes with Russian and Belarusian passports to compete in the Paris 2024 Olympics as individual neutral athletes. That is exactly what Andreeva and a handful of other Russian athletes, including Diana Schneider here on the right, did. That year saw these two take home the silver in women's doubles.
Of course, if Russia, with the help of Belarus, hadn't invaded Ukraine, there'd be nothing to discuss here, would there? But that's where we are with the situation as it is. Both countries are subject to the various controls, as you've been speaking about, Charlotte. With the reactions that you've been showing us, though, earlier, I imagine that not everyone is happy with this particular policy you've highlighted for us. So tell us, are there likely to be any changes?
Exactly, Mark. So opponents of the ban argue that athletes should not be penalised for government actions that they do not control. However, supporters of the ban insist that national symbols represent the Russian state, not just the athletes, and that allowing flags and anthems to play would normalise Russia's participation as the war rages on. In terms of whether the policy is likely to change, well, for some sports bodies, it already has. So last month, the World Gymnastics lifted all restriction on Russian and Belarusian athletes, meaning they will now be allowed to return to international competition under their national flags, as this BBC article explains. In April, the World Aquatics Bureau made a similar decision in terms of what spurred the move. The president of the Bureau said, I quote, over the last 3 years, World Aquatics and the Aquatics Integrity Unit have successfully helped ensure that conflict be kept outside the sporting competition venues. We are determined to ensure that pools and open water remain places where athletes from all nations can come together in peaceful competition. So that decision marked a significant shift in how a key sport treats Russia ahead of the 2028 Olympics, although it is important to point out, Mark, that it only applies to the Bureau's own events like World Championships. There was no immediate comment from the IOC. Ukraine's Minister of Youth and Sports, meanwhile, said in a statement, he denounced that move, saying, I quote, "Today our athletes are training under fire, and against this background of any talk of neutrality or the return of the aggressors' paraphernalia looks shameful and divorced from reality." It remains to be seen, Mark, whether tennis will follow in the footsteps of gymnastics and aquatics. But for the time being, as the war in Ukraine continues, there are no indications from the Tennis Federation that this is the case.
And it's hard not to disagree with what the Ukrainian minister was saying there, the fact that their athletes are training under bombing, under gunfire. It's really unfair to think that the country that is doing that to them is then allowed to carry on and wave their flag and profit from the skill of their athletes, but also make propaganda out of that with the flag in shot. Charlotte, thank you for Truth or Fake. We go now to sport.